Hello, Empire. Garrett here with this week's edition of Regions Corner. Today we're going to talk finally the top subject I'm sure a lot of people wanted to get in on, and that is carving. So right now already here, I went ahead and cased my leather because as we discussed in the last video how important that is, and I don't think we want to sit around and watch leather dry for 20 minutes. So the first thing we're going to start off with is the tools. What are we going to use to carve with? Well, right here we have a pair of swivel knives. This first one here happens to have a very small 1/8 metal one on a very cheap $15 swivel. That's what I paid for it, swivel knife. I only really use this one for decorative cuts and such, hence why it's cheap. And then I have my main one. This is a Signature Pro from Tandy with a 3/8 filigree ceramic blade. Now, blades come in different ones. So we have the ceramic I just showed you. Then we have a pretty standard flat blade steel one you get with most swivel knives when you buy them. Another one you can get is a hollow ground tip, a little bit lighter, a little bit sharper, but still a straight edge. So you can see the difference between a filigree is basically a 45-degree angle versus the straight edge on the steel. Now, like I said before, if you have a steel one, you may occasionally need to sharpen it with a stone in that. If you're using a ceramic blade, you should never need to sharpen it. We're only going to strop it, which, of course, in an earlier video, we discussed on how to make a strop and stick, which we'll get into in just a second. Now, that being said, let me give you a little pro tip that I only recently figured out. On the cheap ones here, if you unscrew this, it will actually, let me get I cranked it down. But if you loosen that up, you can actually adjust how far up and down the height of the finger there. So it makes it much different there. With the Signature, this top one here is set screw. If I unscrew that, I can actually reset the height of the finger. The bottom one is how I set in the blades. So if I want to swap out blades, and you only need one. But that's going to make it so much more comfortable. Especially if you have long fingers like me. I just wanted to point that out. Now, when it comes to carving, the first thing we have to do is trace a pattern. Now, there's a couple different ways you can trace patterns. And first up, what I like to do is we're going to use tracing paper. Now, what I do is I kind of cheat here. I buy my tracing paper from Weaver Leathercraft. They make very high quality tracing paper. And what that's going to allow me to do is, let me put that in there, is I'm going to tape this down. So I would draw my pattern on here. And then once I have my pattern, I'm going to take my round stylus and I'm going to follow my lines. I'm going to try to do this a little quick. This is one of those things where you got to take your time. Fast is smooth, smooth is fast. You'll get, if you're like me and can't draw for nothing, it'll take time. If you got talent, it won't take you nearly as much time. But this is the part where you want to take it smooth and steady. Doesn't have to be perfect, but the closer it is, the easier it is that I found. And I'm just gonna trace. I like to work my way from left to right. That way I don't miss any spots. Now the first time you do this, it's gonna be a little bit trickier. But that's why I like to hold on to it, because then once you've used it once or twice, it kind of gets broke in. And it makes it easier to... that one got away from me a little bit. It makes it a lot easier in the future. Now, when you're just doing very simplistic stuff like this, it's one half a dozen other. The line is considered fairly simple and straightforward by, compared to like Western Floral. But at the same time, if your line work is not good, it will stand out. There's nothing to hide it. There's no, we're not going to be able to come back in and stamp and hide any bad edges or such like that. So this is where I like to say nice and slow and steady. Yeah, well, so just to give you an example, see, I missed a spot right there, so that means now this is why you want to be careful with it. But you know what? Mistakes are made. It doesn't matter. So that's one way to do it. You trace it on, push it in with the stylus. I like to put enough pressure in there that I can actually really get my needle in there. Now, another way we can do this is what's called with a craft aid. Oh, let me show you. So this is happens to be a plastic one I bought from Tandy Leather. Has various designs on it, and you can get them in different styles, all kinds of stuff, everything you could want. These are just a couple. I'm going to show you kind of how it does. And they're pretty cheap. They're about $10. And the nice thing about it is they are reusable, and they're great for when you want to do a complex pattern. So, quick way to show you how this works is you just lay it has a smooth side and a rough side. You're going to put the rough side down on the leather on a nicely piece cased of leather. Now, I like to use a roller versus you can use a hammer. You can even use your fingers, but I like to really push it in there. Now, that being said, you got to be real careful with this because it will like to slide around. And if this slides around and pushes on there, you will not get a good line depth, and that will make carving so much harder. Now let's see this one. I hope you can see it's a little bit light in places. Not quite as deep as I'd like it, but see how simple and quick that pattern was just to compare it to making that small one. I made that complex pattern in no time. And just give an example from earlier when we were doing stuff. This is how I made this pattern. I used this craft aid part, laid it there, spat it out, used a stamp in the center, and created a new design. So you don't have to necessarily always use what they use. All right. So now that we transferred our pattern onto the leather, let me just wet this up a little bit. I like to keep it to wear wet. Now, let's get into the carving. So when I'm carving, like I said, I like to put my hand right there. You're only going to use the tip. This is why I like to use a 45. If I'm using a straight edge, then you're going to hold the just in the corner. I put it in the corner, and then from there, you want to get good light and good angle. What I like to do is I kind of like to I don't know if I'd call it cheating, but I line up the blade with the line I'm cutting. That way, as I go, I know where my blade is going. Now, you want to pick up. There's a couple different ways here. Like when you get to the end, you want to pick up just shy of that, and then come back in and fill in that line. Because what will happen is, if you don't pick it up, and it takes a little bit of practice, but you'll get what's called overcuts. Let me make... Oh, God, now I can't do it on purpose. All right, there we go. So right there is what we call an overcut. That's cutting across the line. That's not what we want to do. That's not what we want to see, especially, so you want to, how much pressure you use, it really depends on the depth of the cut, how deep you want the cut to go. I usually use about, not too much pressure, just enough to cut the leather. You don't want to go super heavy, bury it all in the needle. Remember, we're only trying to use just the tip of the blade there. Now, when you do it, this is a swivel knife. So what I like to do is I like to practice physically twisting the knife, and then I practice pushing my cuts. Push and draw. Now, it's perfectly acceptable to start a cut like this. Let's see. And then if you want, you can rotate the piece and then move it so you're only, most people find it easier to cut towards themselves, and then you can do like that, and you can spin and move it to make it easier for you when you're first starting. But I feel that sooner or later, when you start getting into complex patterns, you're going to have to do cuts like that where I'm coming around the angle, stop a little bit short, come back, cut it in there. Now, you could just as easily, start the cut, draw, get to here, stop, rotate, follow it around. I'm going to do a more complex piece here. Get some water on that. It's a little dry for my... And we discussed this video about casing in another video. Now, I forgot to mention. So, this is my stropping stick. I got some new Jeweler's Rouge. This one happens to be green. It's a little bit more universal than the white I used to use. But now that I've done it a little bit, so we're just going to strop it. This isn't sharpening it. We're polishing the micro fractures and micro serrations of the blade. And you just do 3 or 4 times until I like to go until I don't feel any drag from the edge of the blade. That's how I know it's nice and clean and sharp. I will wipe it off because I don't want any of this rouge to get into my leather. So usually you can take a piece of rag, you can wipe it on your fingers. Not a big deal. And believe me, you'll know the difference between a sharp knife and a dull knife. Then like I said, so what I'm going to do, I usually just find a spot. It's going to be a little tricky. Now when you're carving, let me put my hand where I can see it. You want your hand to be as straight up and down as possible. All right. So if I'm up and perfectly vertical, make sure I can show you that, you'll get a nice even cut. If I'm sitting here doing this, angling it away one way or the other because I can't see, bad lighting, and I want to do that, and I'm trying to do this, and I'm trying to do that, you'll start to see how I had my nice straight clean cut. You'll start to see how the leather's pushed off to the side on there. So how that would look. So if I was like here, it's going to cause, and this is the pickup spin thing I was telling you you're allowed to do. It's going to cause the leather not to be perfectly straight, and you're going to end up with a weird cut on there. So once again, just like when you're punching your needlework, you want to keep your hand as straight as possible. Let me get that on camera. This away as I follow it. And that being said, I rest my hand on my surface, tabletop, whatever, wherever I'm carving. I hold my hand, and then I just keep my hand as straight and steady as I can, and then I align my blade with my cut. Because sometimes what will happen, if you're not watching or you're not careful, you'll get like there where I did on purpose, where I missed the line, I didn't follow it quite right. And that's where it's really important. Lighting is very, very important. Move your spotlights out. I have a very cheap lamp, just a standard cheap metal lamp, $5-10. Goes a long way. You can get 1 or 2 of them because they're cheap. Get 2. Now here, see, I stopped just short. Now I'm going to come over on this side and finish that in. This way I don't have to worry about, let me see if I can make it happen. I don't want to overcut it, do the overcut that we discussed. So I just keep my blade nice and flat and straight, and I line my blade up with the hole where I'm going. And like I said, here you can see how I'm doing. I'm moving my hand, moving the artwork. It's really hard to do with this shadow on camera, but that's okay. We're all learning here. So, and you see I keep my blade hand straight up, follow, and as I'm cutting, I'm just rotating my fingers. That's why it's called a swivel knife. It's got a swivel, so we want it to swivel. And then if I'm going to do, like I said, I got my cheap one here. A lot of people, instead of swapping the blades out all the time, they'll just buy multiple swivel knives. But you don't need to. When you're first starting, one's enough. And then usually if I'm doing this, I will do just little decorative cuts. Now, a great way to practice is a good way to practice is get a little piece of scraps. If you can't, getting a craft aid's a great way to start because it gives you a really good pattern and lets you really get some sometimes more complex and detailed cuts. But realistically, all you need is a piece of scrap leather, and then just practice. Just practice holding your hand straight up, rest your hand, just the very edge. Voila. You can practice your straight lines, and then after that, just practice doing your twirls. I'm not gonna lie, I still have a hard time doing really, really tight circles, but you know what? Just see, like that. That's pretty rough. The leather's probably too dry right now. And that's another thing is if you start to feel the leather fighting you, as in it's just not really feeling like it's wanting to cut, go ahead and re-wet it, case it. And then if I'm doing a lot of carving after I carve for a little while, I'll go back and I'll re-strop my blade. Now when you strop, it's straight back, stop, pick up. Never roll it. If you roll it, you're going to destroy the edge. And the problem with ceramic blades is they're very sharp and very fragile and brittle. So if you ever crack it, drop it, chip the edge, you have to go get a new blade. You're not going to be able to sharpen it out like you could with a steel. So now we did that. And so you can just sit here and make your circles, make lines. Just practice your cuts. Make sure you're not doing things like this. It can be very subtle. It doesn't have to be extreme like I'm showing. It can just be just a little bit off because you start there. If I'm just a little bit off, you're going to see the difference. So you can just practice making cuts. They can be straight cuts. They can be swirlies. Get used to moving that knife around. This is all practice. So remember, straight up, edge of the blade, boom, boom, boom. And you can play around with it for 5-10 minutes every night, and that will greatly increase your skill level. Or like I said, you can get some scrap leather, get yourself a craft aid, and make yourself a really nice small design and get used to working it. And there, because with the knife and this, like I said, this is great practice because there's lots of little tight cuts that you have to make. And you'll get used to not doing like I'm rushing here. I can't see very well. I'm basically making mistakes left and right. But these are all, it's okay because, like I said, we're all learning. And even right now, I want to hold myself there because I'm trying to play to the camera here, not my normal. But see, you can stop, rotate your fingers, and just follow the edge. I stop a little short, come back, cross cut in, cut in. I put my point right into the part where I go, and I didn't pick up, and I did a little overcut right there. And that's what you have to be careful with. Now, as you get better, more practice, you'll get better at knowing when to pick up the blade, when not to pick up the blade. And don't feel bad if you have to keep repositioning the leather work and there, or spinning around. Do whatever you got to do. There is no real right or wrong way to do this. See, I totally just picked it up, swirl it, reposition it, get my spot, reset my blade, reset my knife. Now I could sit here and then boom, and rotate the whole thing. Practice my push away cut. Most people are more comfortable to pull towards them when they first start. Hence why we keep moving the leather. This way I can keep it in a more comfortable, familiar spot. And I'm just gonna keep there, stop a little bit short, and bring it in. And those are the basics of how to carve. I don't think we have much else to do with that. So that's very basic. All I can say in the end is just practice, practice, practice. This is one of those things, no amount of video will ever get you better. All you can learn some tricks and tips, but at the end of the day, you have to practice. And so now, and then for next week, we will be doing stamping, where we'll fill in the background, show you how different things about different stamps and everything you want to know about stamping. So thank you for watching. Until next time, stay crafty.